Kathleen Murphy's hand trembled as she watched the blood pool beneath the 17-year-old boy's head, spreading across the greasy linoleum floor of Dixie's diner like spilled coffee, dark and irreversible. The Friday evening crowd had scattered after the gunshot, leaving overturned chairs and half-eaten meals behind like evidence of interrupted lives. Through the diner's rain-streaked windows, red and blue lights painted the Virginia countryside in emergency colors, while sirens wailed their mechanical grief into the November darkness. Kathleen knelt beside the motionless figure in the army dress uniform, her weathered hands checking for a pulse she already knew she wouldn't find. The bullet had entered just above the left temple. Precise, professional, final. Blood seeped between her fingers as she pressed against the wound, muscle memory from Afghanistan overriding the hopelessness of the situation. "Ma'am, please step away from the body." Detective Ray Morrison's voice carried the exhausted authority of a man who'd seen too many crime scenes in a county that was supposed to be peaceful. "Paramedics need to—" "He's gone." Kathleen's voice was flat, clinical. At 43, she'd pronounced enough deaths to recognize the absolute stillness that followed a soul's departure. Single gunshot wound to the temporal lobe. Instantaneous death. Morrison studied the woman kneeling in her waitress uniform, noting the surgical precision of her assessment and the way she handled trauma with professional detachment. The jagged scar running from her left eye to her chin caught the harsh fluorescent lighting, making her face look like a roadmap of violence survived. "You're Kathleen Murphy? You work here?" She nodded, finally standing and wiping blood from her hands with a diner napkin that immediately soaked through. 3 years. I was serving table 6 when it happened." "And the victim?" "Cadet Michael Thompson, Virginia Military Institute, first year. Comes in every Friday after visiting his grandmother at the nursing home down the road." Her voice caught, slightly. "Came in." Morrison scribbled notes while crime scene photographers documented the carnage. The shooter, Robert Bobby Crane, a 47-year-old construction worker with a history of public intoxication and domestic disputes, sat cuffed in the back of a patrol car, his face blank with shock and cheap bourbon. Witnesses say there was an altercation before the shooting. "Something about your appearance?" Kathleen's jaw tightened. She'd known this question would come, had been dreading it since the moment Bobby Crane's 38 special had ended a young man's life over words that should have been forgotten by morning. "Mr. Crane made some comments about my scar. Cadet Thompson defended me. Things escalated." "What kind of comments?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Kathleen could still hear Bobby's voice, slurred with alcohol and poisoned with casual cruelty. Not too appetizing when you're served by a face from a horror movie, is it? She'd endured worse. In the 3 years since leaving the VA hospital, she'd collected insults like other people collected baseball cards. Customers who asked for different servers. Children who stared and pointed. Well-meaning strangers who assumed her scar was from a car accident or domestic violence. Anything more palatable than the truth. But Cadet Thompson, barely old enough to vote, wearing his dress grays with the pride of someone who still believed in honor and service, had stood up. Had walked across that diner like he was marching into battle, his voice clear and unwavering as he faced down a man twice his age. "Scars from Afghanistan," she told Morrison, touching the raised flesh that traced her cheekbone. "IED blast outside Kandahar, 2019. I was a combat medic with the 10th Mountain Division." Morrison's pen stopped moving. Jesus, and the kid knew. "That, I don't advertise my service record to customers, Detective, but Michael, Cadet Thompson, he had a way of seeing people. Really seeing them." The truth was more complicated. Over the past 6 months, Friday evenings had become something Kathleen looked forward to instead of endured. Michael Thompson would arrive at 6:30 sharp, order coffee and apple pie, and sit at table 12 near the window. He never mentioned her scar, never stared, never treated her like damaged goods. Instead, he talked about his classes at VMI, his sister serving in Korea, his grandfather who'd fought at Normandy. Gradually, carefully, Kathleen had shared pieces of her own story. The pride of wearing the uniform, the satisfaction of saving lives under fire, the nightmares that followed her home. "Tell me about the shooting," Morrison said, step by step. Kathleen closed her eyes, seeing it again with the clarity that trauma branded into memory. Bobby Crane, 3 sheets to the wind and looking for trouble. His family, wife, teenage daughter, adult son, trying to quiet him as his voice grew louder and uglier. Not too appetizing when you're served by a face from a horror movie, is it? The scattered laughter from other tables. The familiar burn of shame in her chest. Her hands shaking as she set down plates, trying to maintain professional composure, while her world tilted sideways. Then Michael had risen from table 12 like an avenging angel in dress grays. "Sir, that woman saved lives while you were probably complaining about cold pizza. She deserves more respect than you'll ever earn." Bobby had lurched to his feet, alcohol making him aggressive and stupid. "Son, you better sit your ass down before. My sister serves overseas. My grandfather was a veteran. If you spoke to them like that, I'd do the same thing." The confrontation had escalated quickly. Bobby's family trying to pull him away. Other customers beginning to applaud Michael's courage. An old Vietnam vet in the corner booth standing to salute. The diner transforming from a place of quiet humiliation into something that felt like justice. Then Bobby had stumbled to his truck. "I thought he was leaving," Kathleen told Morrison. We all did. Michael was still standing there, kind of embarrassed by the attention when Bobby came back through the door with the gun. No warning, no final words. He just pointed and fired. Michael never saw it coming. Morrison studied the scene, noting the distance between the door and table 12, the trajectory of the bullet, the scatter pattern of blood and brain matter across the worn vinyl booth. Bobby Crane had walked back into that diner with murder in his heart, seeking revenge against a boy whose only crime was defending a scarred woman's dignity. Why? Morrison asked, though he'd seen enough domestic violence cases to know that alcohol and wounded pride created their own logic. Because Michael made him look small in front of his family, in front of everyone. Kathleen's voice carried the weight of understanding that came from years of witnessing humanity's capacity for both nobility and brutality. Some men can't handle that. The paramedics loaded Michael Thompson's body onto a stretcher, his dress, uniform still pressed and perfect except for the spreading crimson stain across the jacket's front. Kathleen watched them zip the body bag with the clinical detachment that kept her functional during trauma. But her heart was breaking for a boy who'd died defending her honor. "I'll need you to come to the station for a formal statement," Morrison said. "Probably won't be until tomorrow. This is pretty straightforward. Dozen witnesses, clear motive, suspect in custody." Kathleen nodded, then walked to the employee area to retrieve her purse and coat. The diner felt haunted now, filled with the ghost of a young man's courage and the echo of violence that couldn't be undone. As she prepared to leave, something caught her eye. Tucked under the napkin dispenser at table 12 was a folded piece of paper, written in the careful script they taught at military academies. "Ms. Murphy, thank you for your service. Thank you for the coffee and conversation. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. You don't need to hide your scar, it's your medal. Respectfully, Cadet M. Thompson." Kathleen's hands shook as she read the note, tears finally coming after 3 hours of professional composure. Michael had written this before the confrontation, probably planning to leave it as a tip or a kind gesture. Instead, it had become his final message, a reminder that her scar wasn't a mark of damage but a badge of honor earned in service to others. Outside, Detective Morrison was interviewing witnesses while Bobby Crane sat in the patrol car, his moment of drunken rage having cost a family their son and robbed the world of a young man who still believed in doing the right thing. Kathleen folded the note carefully and placed it in her purse, next to the Purple Heart she'd never shown anyone. 2 medals now, both earned in blood, both reminders that some battles were worth fighting even when the cost was devastating. The diner's owner, Pete Kowalski, approached with insurance forms and expressions of sympathy. "Take tomorrow off, Kathleen. Hell, take the week. This is just horrible." She shook her head. "I'll be here Saturday morning. Regular shift." "You sure? After what happened?" Michael Thompson died defending something he believed in. The least I can do is honor that by not hiding from it. Pete studied her scarred face, perhaps seeing it clearly for the first time. He was a good kid. Yes, he was. Kathleen walked to her car through the November drizzle, past the crime scene tape and emergency vehicles that had turned a simple Friday evening into a tragedy. The note in her purse felt heavier than the Purple Heart, weighted with the sacrifice of a boy who'd seen past her scars to the soldier underneath. At home in her small apartment, she stood before the bathroom mirror and really looked at her reflection for the first time in months. The scar was still there, would always be there, but tonight it looked different. Not like damage to be hidden, but like evidence of battles fought and lives saved. She thought about the IED blast that had given her the scar, the convoy of wounded soldiers she'd been treating when the bomb detonated, the 3 lives she'd saved while her own face was reconstructed with titanium plates and surgical precision. She thought about the Purple Heart in her purse, awarded for wounds received in combat, and about the young cadet who'd called her scar a medal. Maybe he was right. Maybe she'd been hiding from her own courage, letting the cruelty of strangers diminish the sacrifice she'd made for others. Maybe it was time to wear her scar like the medal it was, not with pride in the wound, but with pride in the service that had earned it. Saturday morning came gray and cold, but Kathleen arrived at E.O. Dixie's diner before dawn to prepare for the breakfast shift. She cleaned the bloodstain from the linoleum with industrial bleach and prayers, reset table 12 with fresh flowers, and positioned herself behind the counter to face whatever the day might bring. The first customers arrived at 6 a.m., truckers, and factory workers who needed coffee and calories before starting their shifts. Some stared at her scar, some whispered, some treated her with the casual dismissal she'd grown accustomed to receiving. But at 6:30, exactly when Cadet Thompson would have arrived for his weekly visit, an elderly man in a Vietnam veteran's cap entered the diner and sat at table 12. He ordered coffee and apple pie just like Michael had, and when Kathleen brought his order, he looked directly at her scarred face and said, "Thank you for your service, ma'am." Then another veteran arrived, and another. Word had spread through the local VFW about what had happened, about a young cadet who'd died defending a wounded warrior's honor. They came to pay their respects, to show Kathleen that her sacrifice hadn't been forgotten, that her scars were indeed medals earned in service to others. By noon, Dixie's diner was filled with men and women who understood the true cost of freedom, veterans from Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and conflicts whose names were classified. They didn't stare at Kathleen's scar or whisper behind her back. They saw it for what it was, evidence of courage under fire, proof of lives saved and duties fulfilled. Detective Morrison arrived during the lunch rush, ostensibly to follow up on the case, but really to check on Kathleen's well-being. He found her moving between tables with something approaching peace, serving coffee and taking orders from people who treated her like the hero she'd always been. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than expected," she replied, refilling his coffee cup. "Turns out there are more good people than bad ones. Sometimes it just takes a tragedy to remind us." Morrison nodded toward the veterans filling every table. "This happen often?" "First time. But I think Michael would approve." She touched the folded note in her apron pocket, drawing strength from a dead boy's final act of kindness. "He always said the uniform should be worn in our actions, not just on our bodies. Smart kid." Yes, he was. The lunch rush continued, and Kathleen found herself moving with confidence she hadn't felt in years. The scar on her face caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the diner's windows. But for the first time since leaving Afghanistan, she didn't try to hide it. Instead, she wore it like what Cadet Thompson had said it was, a medal earned in blood and service, a reminder that some wounds were badges of honor rather than marks of damage. As the afternoon wore on, more people arrived. Not all veterans, but community members who'd heard about the shooting and wanted to show support. A local high school brought a memorial wreath for Michael Thompson. The mayor stopped by to thank Kathleen for her service. VMI sent a delegation to honor their fallen cadet and the woman he'd died defending. By evening, Dixie's diner had been transformed from a crime scene into something resembling a wake, not for the dead, but for the courage that had died with Cadet Thompson and been reborn in the community's response to tragedy. Pete Kowalski surveyed the crowded diner with amazement. In 30 years of running this place, I've never seen anything like this. Kathleen wiped down table 12, where a small American flag now stood next to the fresh flowers. Michael had a gift for bringing out the best in people. Even after he's gone. You think he'd be proud? She looked around the diner at veterans sharing stories, community members offering support, and strangers who'd become allies in the space of a single day. I think he'd be surprised, but yes, proud. As closing time approached, the last customers paid their bills and offered final words of encouragement before heading into the night. Kathleen began the familiar routine of cleaning tables and preparing for the next day, but tonight the work felt different. Not like hiding, but like preparing to serve. Detective Morrison stopped by one final time before heading home. Got word from the DA's office. Bobby Crane's being charged with first-degree murder. Premeditation's pretty clear. He left, got the gun, came back. He's looking at life without parole. Good. The word came out harder than Kathleen intended, but she felt no remorse for it. Michael Thompson deserved justice, and his family deserved closure. One more thing, Morrison said, pulling out a small evidence bag. We found this in the kid's pocket. Figured you should have it. Inside the bag was a small military challenge coin, the kind units created to build camaraderie and recognize achievement. This one bore the VMI seal on one side and an inscription on the other. Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Kathleen accepted the coin with reverence, understanding that it represented more than military tradition. It was Michael's legacy, a reminder that courage came in many forms. From the battlefield heroism that had earned her Purple Heart to the simple act of standing up for what was right in a small-town diner. That night, she placed the challenge coin on her bedside table next to the Purple Heart and Cadet Thompson's note. 3 medals now, each representing a different kind of courage, each reminding her that scars were not signs of weakness, but evidence of battles fought for others. When she looked in the mirror before bed, Kathleen saw her reflection with new eyes. The scar was still there, would always be there, but it no longer looked like damage. It looked like what Michael Thompson had called it, a medal earned in service, worn with honor rather than shame. The next morning brought new challenges and new opportunities to serve, but Kathleen faced them with confidence restored and purpose renewed. She'd learned that courage was contagious, that one person's stand for what was right could inspire others to be better than they thought possible. As she prepared for another day at Dixie's Diner, she carried with her the memory of a 17-year-old cadet who'd seen past her scars to the soldier underneath. His death had been a tragedy, but his life, however brief, had been a triumph of the human spirit over cruelty and indifference. The scar on her face caught the morning light as she unlocked the diner's front door, but Kathleen no longer tried to hide it. Instead, she wore it like the medal it was, a reminder that the best of humanity often emerged from the worst of circumstances, and that courage could be found in the most unexpected places. But what none of them knew, not Detective Morrison, not the supportive veterans, not even Kathleen herself, was that Michael Thompson had never been a cadet at VMI. The dress uniform was borrowed from his deceased brother. The military knowledge came from obsessive study, not training. The challenge coin was purchased online. Michael Thompson was a 17-year-old dropout with a history of mental illness who had spent months creating an elaborate fantasy, visiting the diner every Friday to play the role of the soldier he'd never been able to become. And in his final moment, defending a real veteran's honor with courage he'd only dreamed of possessing, he had become exactly what he'd always pretended to be.